You know that feeling when you are staring down this massive life-altering choice?
Oh, yeah, like the kind that keeps you up at 3 a.m.
Exactly. You might be, agonizing over a career pivot or a cross-country move or deciding whether to commit to a relationship. And part of you just wants a literal blazing, burning bush to appear in your living room and spell out exactly what you were supposed to do.
Right, because we crave that absolute binary certainty. I
Mm.
mean, having a giant neon sign pointing left or right, it feels incredibly safe because it completely removes the burden of ambiguity.
It really does.
If the universe just hands you a detailed itinerary for your life, well, you can't make a mistake.
But then you wake up in the real world and you realize those neon signs and burning bushes are, well, they're nowhere to be found.
Sadly, no.
Instead, you are looking at a landscape of choices that is just terrifyingly murky. You are trying to parse through pros and cons and gut feelings and external pressures, which usually just leads to total decision paralysis.
How-
And that is exactly why the material we are jumping into today is so compelling. For this deep dive, we're unpacking excerpts from a Bible study facilitated by Reverend Lettie Carr.
Right, along with a YouTube transcript from the channel Whosoever Believes. And that one is titled WCWC Discipleship, the Will of God.
Yeah. And just to set the stage for you, our listener, we are not here to debate theology today.
Definitely not. Our mission is to put on our analytical hacks, so to speak, and extract the highly structured, practical framework that Reverend Carr actually outlines for decision-making.
It is a really fascinating methodology.
It is. She shows how to navigate life's uncertainties by triangulating principles, community, and intuition to discern what she refers to as God's will.
And the very first step in her methodology completely flips how most of us approach our big choices. It all centers on what she frames as the prerequisite of motion.
The prerequisite of motion. I love that phrase.
Right. Carr argues that finding your ultimate path actually begins with acting on the tiny bit of information you already possess. Like, rather than sitting frozen while you wait for the entire detailed blueprint to drop into your lap.
And she illustrates this using a really brilliant, elegantly simple physical analogy. She likens the human decision-making process to a rolling ball.
Okay, a rolling ball.
Yeah, so if you have a ball that is already moving across the floor, all you have to do is tap it lightly to redirect its trajectory. Right? The momentum is already doing the heavy lifting.
That makes sense.
But try directing a ball that is completely stationary. You have to apply a massive amount of initial force just to overcome the inertia. So the core philosophy here is, well, you can't steer a parked car.
Okay, let's unpack this concept because the psychology behind it is so sound. It is very much like typing a destination into a GPS app on your phone.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. You input the final address, but if you just sit in your driveway, the app can't give you the very first turn. It literally says proceed to the route.
Yes, exactly.
It needs your vehicle to actually start moving forward so it can calibrate your location and direction. And only then does the map orient itself.
What's fascinating here is how the source material connects this behavioral reality to a specific ancient text. Reverend Carr cites Psalm 119, verse 105, which says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet."
A lamp to my feet.
Right, and the textual nuance there is crucial for understanding the framework. It specifically says a lamp to the feet. In antiquity, a small oil lamp would only cast enough light to illuminate the ground maybe like a yard in front of you.
Oh, wow. So not a floodlight.
Exactly. It is not a modern, high-powered stadium floodlight illuminating the entire 10-mile highway ahead.
It provides just enough visibility so you don't trip over the next rock.
Exactly. And she points to the story of Moses to demonstrate how this localized illumination works. According to the text, God instructs Moses to leave the wilderness and return to Egypt to free his people. That is the only instruction provided at the outset.
There's no master plan handed over.
Nope. The narrative doesn't mention the 10 plagues at that point. There is certainly no advance warning that he will eventually need to orchestrate the parting of the Red Sea.
That would be a pretty big detail to leave out.
Right. But the logic driving this framework is strictly sequential. If Moses had refused to take the first, seemingly blind step toward Egypt, he never would have encountered the Red Sea in the first place. The framework asks, why would you be handed the schematics for step 10 when you haven't even initiated step 1?
That is powerful. But translating that to a modern context feels incredibly tricky to me.
How so?
Well, if you are sitting there wondering if you should marry a specific person or if you should accept that accounting job in Chicago, you can't just flip open an ancient text and find a verse that says, hey, sign the lease in Illinois.
Right, right.
The text just doesn't offer modern specifics like that.
And that limitation is exactly what brings us to the second major pillar of Carr's methodology, which is the requirement to search for overarching principles rather than demanding highly specific names or places.
Okay, principles over specifics.
Exactly. If you are agonizing over a relationship, like you mentioned, the text will never provide a specific name like Susie. However, Carr points out that the text does offer a working principle, the directive, to not be yoked together with an unbeliever.
Oh, I see. So applying that single broad principle automatically functions as a massive filter.
Precisely. It eliminates half the options on the table without requiring some mystical personalized sign.
And the sources provide a vivid, real-world anecdote from Reverend Carr's own life to demonstrate how this works, and I love this story. The setting is January of 1995, and she is standing at a massive professional crossroads.
A really massive one. She was offered a highly lucrative partnership at her law firm. And in the legal profession, that is the ultimate pinnacle of success.
It's what everyone works for.
Yeah, it is the moment where years of grinding finally pay off financially and socially.
Yet, simultaneously, she describes feeling this intense, conflicting internal calling. She had been meditating heavily on the biblical book of Isaiah, specifically the first chapter.
And that chapter places a heavy emphasis on representing the voiceless, the downtrodden, and the underrepresented.
Right, and she calls this internal intuition her spirit man, like her core spiritual compass.
So she is facing a profound cognitive dissonance here. The external world is offering her a path of undeniable societal prestige, while her internal framework is highlighting a principle of service to the marginalized.
To resolve this, she does something that feels so wonderfully retro today. She picks up the Sunday edition of the Washington Post to scour the physical employment classifieds.
Wow, the actual Sunday paper.
Yeah, she's flipping through these massive, thick pages of job listings, and she spots an advertisement for legal aid, which of course perfectly aligns with the principle of helping the downtrodden.
Right.
She also spots a listing for the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, and she actually knew the directors at both of those organizations, and they were essentially ready to hire her on the spot.
Talk about having options.
Right. To complicate matters further, the park and planning position offered a salary 5 times higher than her other options.
And that's including a position she was also considering as a prison chaplain.
Exactly. But her spirit man felt undeniably drawn to that deeply unglamorous, much lower-paying chaplaincy role. So, acting purely on the principle derived from Isaiah, she formally turned down the law firm partnership.
Which is just a huge leap of faith.
She notes that people looked at her as if she were absolutely crazy. From a purely economic standpoint, her decision made zero sense.
Right.
But within her framework, she applied the principle and chose the internal piece of representing the voiceless over the external validation of a massive paycheck.
Now, while relying on that internal spirit man is vital, the framework explicitly warns against relying on it in isolation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Personal intuition is presented as just one piece of a larger diagnostic puzzle. The third core aspect of the text stresses the absolute necessity of wise counsel in community.
And here's where I really have to push back on the framework a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, in our modern culture, we fiercely celebrate the independent, self-made individual, right? We completely romanticize the lone wolf who bucks the system and trusts their own gut against all odds.
We do. We really do.
So if I have done the work to clarify my principles, why do I need to submit my deeply personal life decisions to a committee of other people? I mean, what if that community is just risk-averse or projecting their own fears onto me?
That is a very valid modern concern. The danger of groupthink is real. But Reverend Carr addresses this necessity of community through a rather humorous biological analogy.
Okay.
She suggests imagining your index finger suddenly deciding entirely on its own that it wants to go out and see a movie.
The finger wants to see a movie.
Yeah. And the figure obviously cannot detach itself, hail a cab, and sit in the theater independently.
Well, no, that would be terrifying.
Exactly. It cannot function or survive without the rest of the body. So the framework operates on the premise that human beings are fundamentally not designed to be lone wolves. We are integrated parts of a larger biological and spiritual ecosystem. Okay, that analogy does make it clear.
And to back this up, the text leans heavily on Proverbs 15.22, which states, "Without counsel, plans go awry." But your point about toxic or fearful communities is exactly why the text includes a massive caveat. It cannot be just any random counsel.
Right, you aren't just putting a poll up on social media and crowdsourcing your life choices to the internet.
Please don't do that. According to Psalm 1, which the text explicitly references, the advice must be godly counsel. You do not seek life direction from what the text calls the ungodly or the scornful.
So you need a specific kind of advisor.
Yes, you have to consult individuals whose own lives actively demonstrate an alignment with the principles you're trying to follow. Carr introduces a fascinating diagnostic rule here regarding that alignment. She asserts that the Holy Spirit is not schizophrenic or double-minded.
Meaning the underlying truth shouldn't manifest as pure chaos.
Exactly. She provides a really practical test. If you present your dilemma to 3 highly trusted, aligned friends, let's call them Tiffany, Karen, and Brittany.
Okay, Tiffany, Karen, and Brittany. And if they give you 3 completely contradictory sets of advice, someone in that group is not actually aligned. In this framework, truth operates like a harmonious chord in music. The frequencies have to match.
That is so interesting, and we see a perfect illustration of this harmonious flow through another story in the text involving Reverend Annie Darden.
Yes, this is a great example.
So after spending 21 years working in the prison system, Reverend Carr felt that familiar internal shift again. It was time for a new chapter. Her trusted counselor, a woman she had relied on for nearly 4 decades, this Reverend Annie Darden came to her with a very specific directive.
And what did she say?
Darden announced her own retirement and told Carr, "You need to apply for my position."
Wow. And Carr's immediate reaction was total, visceral resistance, right?
Total resistance. She wanted nothing to do with it. The job was at First Baptist Church, Glenard, running their ministry support team. Carr genuinely thought her friend was misguided, assuming there were plenty of internal candidates already vying for the position.
Sure, that makes sense.
But because she recognized Darden as a source of wise, aligned counsel, the framework dictated that she couldn't simply dismiss the advice.
She had to take it seriously.
Right. She weighed it heavily, pushed past her resistance, and submitted the application. And then, according to Carr, the alignment became undeniable. She describes the ensuing process as God completely clearing the field.
Like the path of least resistance suddenly manifested.
Exactly. There were initially 3 finalists for the role. One of the candidates inexplicably dropped out of the running at the very last minute.
Okay.
And then the other finalist, who was currently in seminary, essentially admitted during the interview process that her primary goal was to sit quietly and study her textbooks all day, rather than actively managing the ministry support team.
Which is a revelation that naturally disqualified her in the eyes of the hiring committee.
You would think so. So Carr becomes the last candidate standing, and she gets the job. But she still expects friction.
Why is that?
She assumes she is going to clash horribly with her new boss because he presents as this highly rigid, military-style leader, and she had intentionally avoided military environments her whole life.
I see.
Yet they ended up working together seamlessly, and the ultimate sign of alignment. It turned out her new boss was a massive Dallas Cowboys fan, exactly like her trusted friend Annie Darden.
That is the harmonious chord the framework aims for. The internal intuition, the external counsel, and the unfolding circumstances, they all synchronize.
It's wild how that worked out.
It is. And once you put the ball in motion and seek out that aligned counsel, the framework suggests you will begin to experience specific external confirmations. The source material highlights 2 staggering examples of this phenomenon.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The first one is the Lionel Richie anecdote, and the sequence of events here is just wild.
They'll love this one.
Reverend Carr was asked to preach a eulogy for a man she had never personally met. He was the brother-in-law of a church member named Sister Tijana. Carr speaks with the grieving family to get a sense of the man's character, and then she goes to sleep.
Okay.
For 2 consecutive days during her preparation, she wakes up with a very specific song looping in her head, Easy by Lionel Richie. You know, the classic lyric, easy like Sunday morning.
Which is undeniably a secular pop soul anthem. It is highly unorthodox material for a traditional religious eulogy.
Highly unorthodox. She was incredibly hesitant to use it, wondering why on earth this song was stuck in her mind. But she decided to take the risk.
She leaned into it.
Yeah. She realized the vibe of the song perfectly encapsulated the deceased man's notoriously gentle, smooth, and kind nature. So she integrates the song into the eulogy, explicitly drawing a parallel between the man's easygoing personality and the biblical description of Jesus, who says, "My yoke is easy."
That's a clever connection.
She playfully asks the congregation not to judge her for quoting Lionel Richie from the pulpit, and the message resonates beautifully. But the true confirmation happens after the service.
At the post-funeral gathering.
Yes. The family, around 40 people in total, all travel to a local Golden Corral restaurant for the repast, which is the traditional meal shared after a funeral service.
Right.
They are all clustered together in the busy foyer, waiting for the staff to prepare their private dining room. And out of nowhere, what starts playing over the restaurant's generic overhead intercom?
Let me guess. Lionel Richie.
Easy like Sunday morning, playing loudly in the middle of a Golden Corral. The family members lose their minds because they hadn't heard that specific song in years. And it served as this massive emotional punctuation mark on the entire day.
From an analytical perspective, we could view this through the lens of the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon or the frequency illusion.
Oh, sure.
When your brain is heavily primed to focus on a specific piece of information, like a song you just preached about, you suddenly notice it everywhere in your environment. But within Carr's framework, this isn't dismissed as mere cognitive bias.
Right, it means something more.
Exactly. The text utilizes a specific term introduced by Pastor John K. Jenkins to describe this. He calls them similitudes.
Similitudes. It sounds almost archaic, but it carries so much weight.
It does. A similitude, in this context, is a highly specific, synchronized sign used to grab your attention and affirm that your current trajectory is correct.
Like a nod from the universe.
Yes. The framework posits that when you are fully aligned, you don't have to forcefully kick doors open. The path naturally reinforces itself through these external similitudes. It functions as a feedback loop. And the second story in the text illustrates this just as vividly, but this time with a massive truck.
Oh, the Jessup truck story.
Yeah, back when Carr was first transitioning into her chaplaincy career, she was called in for her very first interview. The facility was located in a town called Jessup, Maryland.
Which she had never heard of, right?
Never. Prior to this opportunity, she had literally never heard of Jessup. She had no idea it was a major geographical hub for the state's prison facilities. She is incredibly anxious because she has made it past the initial screening and now has to sit down face-to-face with the prison warden.
She is fighting severe imposter syndrome, assuming the hiring committee must have made a mistake.
Exactly. But she manages to get through the interview successfully. Running on pure adrenaline, she leaves the prison grounds and drives back to Upper Marlboro, where she was still operating her private law practice.
Okay.
She pulls her car up to a routine stop sign right in front of the local courthouse. She happens to glance up, and idling directly in her line of sight is an enormous commercial truck.
And what does it say?
Painted in massive, unavoidable letters across the side of the trailer are the words, Jessup, Maryland.
A town name that held zero significance to her brain until a few hours prior, suddenly dominating her field of vision. Okay, so if a person actually follows these steps, they take the blind action, they filter their choices through principles, they consult their aligned community, and they experience these similitudes, what is the ultimate effect on the individual? Like, how does navigating this framework change the person doing the navigating?
Well, the result is a fundamental metamorphosis. The text anchors this concept in the New Testament book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, which urges individuals to be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Transformed.
Yes, and the source material dives into the original Greek root word used for transformed in that text, pointing out that it is the exact origin of our modern word metamorphosis.
Like the biological process of a caterpillar dissolving and rebuilding itself into a butterfly.
Exactly. But Reverend Carr contextualizes that ancient Greek concept for a modern audience using a brilliant pop culture reference. She uses a transformer toy.
Oh, I love that.
Right. You are holding a plastic yellow bumblebee car, and with a few deliberate mechanical shifts, it becomes a Mustang robot. The exterior components might be similar, but the essential nature and function of the object have completely shifted.
She actually shares a fantastic visceral memory from her own life to highlight the stark reality of this metamorphosis. She recalls attending a Parliament Funkadelic concert at the massive Capitol Center Arena back around 1975.
An environment steeped in heavy funk music, massive crowds, and sensory overload. A pretty jarring contrast to the austere halls of a maximum security prison.
Totally. She describes standing in this incredibly smoke-filled room, completely absorbed in the culture of that era. When she looks back at that past version of herself from her current vantage point as a chaplain, she says, I don't look like what I've been through.
Wow.
The core assertion of the framework here is that true alignment actually changes your internal desires. Your want to shifts. She no longer possessed any desire to be in that smoke-filled arena.
But she is careful to note that this level of transformation isn't passive magic.
Right. It takes work.
It requires immense repetitive effort. She compares the process of internalizing these principles to a cow chewing its cud. You have to consume the information, bring it back up, chew on it again, and deeply digest it over time.
And that rigorous digestion process leads us to the final, ultimate diagnostic test of this entire framework. When you are staring at that murky landscape of choices, how do you know definitively that you have successfully navigated to the correct destination?
The text points to a principle found in 1 Corinthians 7.15.
The ultimate indicator.
The ultimate indicator that you are, to quote Pastor Jenkins from the source material, right downtown Rule of God Street, is the presence of an anchoring, unshakable peace.
Which, I mean, that sounds lovely, but how does that hold up when everything in your life is going wrong?
And that is the genius of the framework's final visual analogy. It's the wind tunnel.
The wind tunnel.
Imagine you are standing inside a literal industrial aerodynamic wind tunnel. The massive turbines are turned on, and the decibel level is deafening. The physical force of the wind is trying to rip you off your feet.
Always sounds awful.
The text likens this to seasons in life when the enemy is attacking, or when all hell is breaking loose in your relationships or finances. The external circumstances are violently chaotic.
So the peace they're talking about is not the absence of a storm.
Far from it. The peace is the heavy internal anchor that keeps your boots planted on the floor of the wind tunnel. Despite the sheer force of the external pressure, you do not abandon your position because the internal clarity of your decision holds you in place. You aren't blown away because the choice was made in deep alignment.
That is such a vivid way to understand cognitive resilience. So if you are listening right now and you are facing a massive crossroads, let's summarize the machinery of this framework. First, do not wait for the entire map to be drawn. Put the car in drive and use the tiny bit of light you have to take the very next step.
Right.
Second, stop agonizing over specific names and places and instead apply broad principles to filter your options. Third, refuse to be a lone wolf. Submit your plans to an aligned community that isn't afraid to correct you.
A trusted community.
Exactly. Fourth, keep your eyes open for those similitudes, those Lionel Richie and Jessup truck moments that reinforce your momentum. And finally, when the pressure mounts, trust the anchor of internal peace inside the wind tunnel.
I will leave you with this final provocative thought to consider long after we wrap up today. We spend so much time discussing decision paralysis, as if it is a uniquely modern psychological disease brought on by the endless scrolling and information overload of the digital age.
We definitely do.
We constantly believe that if we just gather one more data point, read one more article, or make one more spreadsheet, the correct path will mathematically reveal itself. But what if the cure for our paralysis isn't gathering more data?
What if it's not?
What if the cure, as this framework so compellingly demands, is simply having the courage to take the one tiny, terrifying step you already know you should take and trusting that the ground will solidify beneath your feet only after you shift your weight onto it?
It completely flips the script. You don't need the burning bush to appear before you move. The act of moving is what eventually leads you to the fire. Thank you for joining us as we unpack these sources on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.